the end has to be coming out here, sometimes the end has to come out here. And what I do is I force it in because it's in a roll, and then I take the ends and dun them out. The next step would be this person here would take it and put a hole at the end of every one of these pieces of coil. And that's how they hooked it up. And then the next person dipped it into like a silver solder to make it a better electrical component. It just kept on going on. The material cost here, okay, say that big roll costs $20,000. They say they cut up that whole roll and they moved it to here. That $20,000 comes over. Plus, did we pay this guy? His wage comes over, plus the overhead comes over to Department 2. Department 2, there's $20,000 of material. See, the material's all in, right? What is he doing? He's cutting it again or making it smaller, but all the $20,000 of material is already in. We're now just passing over to Department 3, still the same $20,000, but his wage and his portion of the overhead. Going to, now, stage 3, say by the time it came to me, stage 7, this $20,000 was still the cost of the material, but we kept on pushing over everybody's wage and overhead. Does that make sense? At the end, assuming that we used up all of it, and it was ready to be sold, we pushed, how much was the material? Still $20,000. What changes? Labor and the overhead, which is called the conversion cost. So it adds. So let's say at the end of the day we stopped here. And that's considered 70% of the work is done to make this a finished good, to make this a finished product. Okay? The materials came in, they're 100% in, 20,000. 70% of everybody's labor and overhead is in. Right? Because I still have some here left of this material. But it's in the 20,000 in right away. I still have labor and overhead that have not been accounted for, but the material has been accounted for. Does that make it a little easier? The material has been accounted for.
So if there's some guy at the end of the assembly line, like after the 70% is done, who has some piece that he's put on, are you accounting that material within the month of May, or are you accounting it in the next month when they'll complete it?
Next month.
Okay.
That'd be carried over. Just
For-
like it was carried over here.
For that material cost?
Right. For the new material, and his labor and overhead, this, like his labor and overhead from here, it's gonna be carried over to the next month.
Okay.
Okay? Because it was not 100% complete.
Right.
But the materials were 100% complete. Yes, no? Help? Does it help?
Where does the cost added come in?
Was the cost value?
The cost added, where does that come in?
Oh, that was the cost of all this. Every time you move it from department to department, the cost is added. So let's say it's done completely in Department 2 and going to Department 3 in the month. That's all that cost is being shifted on, added on. What your cost was, let's say we paid this guy $100 in wages, and his overhead was $50. When it got to Department 2, $150 is shifted over, plus the $20,000. Say the guy in Department 2 is $100 and $50. When he goes to Department 3, it's $20,000 plus $150 from here, right? $150 from here, so now it's $20,300 coming in here. Do you see how it's moving with the people?
Okay.
With the production?
So they're giving you that 76,000 in the problem? Like, can you figure that out or no?
Just a random number.
Just a random given number?
No, they're giving you that. Somebody gave you that. See what I told you about this course? People, you're looking for, where did you get that number? Somebody gave you that number.
So don't look for rate guide.
Somebody gave you that cost figure. Somebody did the calculation already to get that cost figure. okay? Somebody gave you that calculation. The only thing you have to fill out here, find out is basically what is the cost per unit? That's what you're looking for. What is the cost per unit? And then if you get the cost per unit and you get the number of units that were 110,900 units came over for materials, of the 110,900, only 3570 or 70% of it was completed. It would be carried over. The other 30% is still back there. It's part of the ending inventory.
So,
So what do you do with the other, like, 30% of the,
You don't do anything with it because they're only asking you for what it is at the end of this month. Next month,
So
you
that's-
start over again.
okay.
And you just keep on carrying it forward. So the 30% here is gonna actually be calculated in the next month.
so June would have 30%
30% is being carried over.
at the start of the month.
It could be at the start of the month. 30% of the 5,100 would be carried over to the start of the month. Then you'd find out how many units were actually made in the month, plus the 30% that you start over, minus what you had at the end of that month. See, the hard part here is the concept of equivalent units. When I first started out, I gave you four buildings that have 4 apartments in each one. And if you cleaned 1 apartment in each of the 4 buildings, the equivalent is saying you've completed 1 building. Right? But you only completed 1 unit out of 4 buildings. But that's equivalent to saying I finished 1 building. That's what we're doing here. Does it make sense? Okay? To get the equivalent units. You know, how much, like the example I gave you, how much money you got in your pocket? You got $31.60? You got $31 in your pocket. You're giving me an equivalent, an approximate. That equivalent is never exact. Is never, ever exact. Because production keeps on going, especially for a company that has 24-hour production. I saw this when I went to Detroit. There's the Henry Ford Museum. And in the Henry Ford Museum, that's where the cars were originally developed. They also have a tour that goes on where the F-150 trucks are made. And they take you on this, like this catwalk, but it's closed in glass, so you can't fall down, okay? And they show you, and you go from one section of the factory to another. And it shows you items that come in from the warehouse. Let's say a fender will come in that's already been bent up and looks like a fender from another factory. And how it's assembled with a truck. By the last stage, it's finished. Okay? And they have a series of lines. And they may have 30 lines. Okay? Now, let's say they only had an 8-hour day. And at the end of the month, some trucks are 90% finished, some trucks are 80% finished, some trucks are 70% finished, 50%, 40%. They use 50% equivalent units. Because there's a truck ready to roll off, but it's not. And there's a truck part that's just coming on. It comes out, the frame comes in. That's the beginning process. So there's one truck, somebody at stage 1, they just push the frame on, and stage 30 is the truck is ready to be pushed off, ready going to finished goods. So if you got 30 stages, and there are 20 steps in each stage, at the end of the day, let's say the end of the month and the end of that day is, and it closes at 4 o'clock using that day, let's say on June 30th. if that was, or December 31st, that was the end of the year, using that for an example, you would say 50% of that assembly line should produce, from beginning to end, it should produce, say, 500 trucks. That would be equivalent to say 250 trucks are completed. But there are not 250 trucks completed. There's one that's 99.9% completed, and there's one that they just brought in the frame. But the equivalent number of units would be their ending inventory. Now, the materials are 100% in. The labor and the overhead, the labor, because it would be calculated at 50%. Okay? Because these people really didn't start it, and these people finished it. So that's, they show you that assembly line. And it's really interesting because they showed originally, when Henry Ford started the company in 19 whatever, okay? They actually had a steel plant that they actually made the steel. Then it went to another factory, right on the same grounds, that took the steel and formed the steel for the Model Ts. And then they had another factory that actually made wheels, and they had another little factory that was a rubber factory, where today, we don't have that. They get the rubber from how it was manufactured, or the actual tire completed, from Dunlop or Firestone. They get their the batteries from Energizers, or whatever the company is that making the batteries. From Harrison Radiator, who makes the radiators. They get all these parts into their warehouse, and then when the items come into the assembly part, that's when they add the cost in of that material. Remember, they pay for that from another company. Okay? They pay for that radiator, they pay for those tires. So whatever they pay for will be added into as materials. Their labor and their overhead is the one which we're doing the calculation on. What you're going to be, what you really need to know in an organization, no matter what they do, okay, when they start dealing with overhead, that's one of the most significant parts of what they're always trying to reduce. And they're going to be using terms like materials. Can we lower the cost of materials? Can I find somebody else to make the item cheaper for me? Labor. Are we paying our people too much? And maybe we are, maybe not. And what is my overhead? Okay? What's the fastest thing to get rid of when you need to get rid of cost? Labor. Okay? Labor is the fastest thing to get rid of, so you lay people off. But your overhead still may be there. Your overhead still may be there. Now you got to figure out how to get rid of your overhead, and of course your material costs will go down if you're not producing as much. But your overhead could stay the same. If you have rent or property taxes or utilities, that still may stay the same. Maybe there may be a difference in jump in price of utilities because you're using utilities less. Instead of using it 16 hours or 24 hours a day, you're using 8 hours a day. But this is how you decrease your costs. So you have to have the understanding of the three different departments. Okay? Maybe this will help. Go to chapter 3, the questions. Let me go through the questions, chapter 3. Because this may help you with the logic. And then we'll go through the self-assessment. Go to the questions that's on page
107.
Yeah, there's only 10 questions, and you got the answers in front of you, okay? And the answer sheet. Page 107 in the book. Explain the major difference between job order cost and processing cost system. Job order costing is used when a company produces individual products or batches or produces that are unique. Generally, each unique product or batch is a job for which the company needs cost information. Therefore, manufacturing costs must be traced to a specific job. Processing cost, which is chapter 3, on the other hand, is used when a company produces large quantities of identical items. It is basically a system of averaging. System of averaging. So when you've got an average, it's never exact. You get 100 on one test, you get an 80 on another test, you get a 60 on another test, you're saying you're a B student. Well, not according to your first test, you're an A student. Do you see what the concept of averaging? The production costs are divided by the number of units to arrive at the average unit cost. Look at number 2. Forget that, it says students will vary. Go to number 3. Explain the concept of equivalent units, including how it is calculated. Equivalent units is the quantity of partial completed units expressed in terms of whole units. Right?
So could you do like a percentage of total materials then? Wouldn't that be the same?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Percentage and doing it as far as total.
Mm-hmm.
To calculate the equivalent units, the number of units is multiplied by the percentage of the completion. So the 5,100 multiplied by 70% gave me 3,570 equivalent whole units.
Yeah.
Look at number 4. What is meant by the term conversion, labor and overhead? Okay. Number 5. What is meant by the term transfer in cost? Cost associated with units received from a preceding department within the company and further processing called transfer in cost. It means we take all our costs and we keep on pushing it forward. Okay? Look at number 6. Why are units often in different stages of completion with respect to raw materials and conversion costs? Materials may be entered at the start of production. Remember the 20,000 I showed you here? That was the material and started at the start of production. But labor and overhead is going to be constantly added on for the next 50 departments. So materials may be entered at the start of production, while labor and overhead are incurred throughout the process, added on through each department. Look at number 7. What item of production cost may make up for the cost accounted for production cost reports? Cost to the accounts equals the cost of beginning inventory, beginning work in process, and cost incurred. Then we take the beginning plus the cost incurred for the month. Number 8. What is accomplished by preparing reconciliation? Don't forget that one. Number 9. Do transfer in costs occur in all departments of a manufacturing using the processing cost system? Number 9. Transfer in costs, that means we're adding the costs as we go through each department, are the costs associated with units received from the preceding department within the company received for further processing. Therefore, they occur in all production departments except the first. Right? Because that's where you start. What?
There's nothing transferred.
There's nothing transferred in. Go to page self-assessment,
That's the page.
106. The answer's on the bottom of the page. Okay? Which of the following characteristics are associated with the processing cost system? Homogeneous, all the same, right? Identical. They're not individual. They're not unique. How about continuing production, right? Goes from department to department. Costs can be traced to the preceding department. They're traced from the preceding department going forward. Make sense? The best example of a business requiring a processing cost system would be a custom cabinet shop. Aren't they making every cabinet different? That's unique. That's a job order cost system. Antique furniture restore. It's a service, but it's still, what? Unique. Job order cost. I did a certain, let's say this table was antique, and I refinished the surface, and you refinished the legs. You would add your cost to my cost, but it's still unique. We're not doing hundreds of these, okay? Soap manufacturer. Soap is made in batches, so that's processing cost system. Automobile repair, well, I take my car in, doesn't mean I got the same problems as you have. Those are unique. Number 3, the cost and process systems are traced to specific production departments, not to a specific job because that's unique. Specific customer, that's unique. Specific company care administrator, no. Specific production departments, they're going from department to department to department.
Like your Ford and Silverado had 30 departments.
Right. Match the following terms with the definition number listed.
I mean,
Okay? 1 is C, transferring costs. The costs associated with the units received from the preceding department for further processing. You're transferring in the cost, you're carrying the cost forward. Number 2 is D, cost per equivalent unit. The unit cost in the preceding costing system. Number 3 is A, conversion cost. The cost associated with charging units of direct materials into finished products. They include both the direct labor and the manufacturing overhead. That would be the conversion cost. If you finished all of them, then you would have 100% of materials, labor, and overhead. But if you didn't, but if you had an ending inventory, then you have a conversion, or you have a percentage for the labor and the overhead, assuming that the materials came in at the beginning. If you have to add more materials, no, you can get into that. If you have to add more materials, then the materials would have to be calculated also.
Like a just-in-time inventory?
Yeah, you have to constantly have to add more materials. Number 4, the quantity of a particular completed unit expressed in terms of whole. B would be equivalent units expressed in whole numbers. Number 5, determine the amount of conversion costs in the following. This is the type of problem you're going to get. What is the conversion cost? The direct labor is $25,000. Direct materials. Direct labor is $35,000. Manufacturing is $45,000. Selling expense is a period cost, right? Administrative expense is a period cost. Determine the amount of conversion costs. What's conversion? Labor and overhead. $35,000 and $45,000 is $80,000. That's your answer. Right? Selling and administrative expenses are period costs. Period costs. That's a question in your test. Okay? If raw materials are introduced in the production department at the beginning of the process, which statement is correct about the equivalent units in the ending work in process? In the ending work in process. All the units in the work in process are 100% complete with respect to materials. The materials are added in at the beginning, just like in the example I showed you, 20,000 for this answer. Number 7, a transfer of units from production department 1 to production department 2 would be recorded as a debit to work in process department 2 and a credit to department 1. And just increasing and decreasing an asset account. I don't think I'm going to ask you anything like that. Number 8. But you should be able to figure that one out.
It's gonna be amazing.
The unit reconciliation section of production costs, I want to get into that one. Units of finished goods. Go to number 10. Transferring costs occur in all production departments after the first department. Means you move in, you're adding on the cost. Okay?
How many problems gonna be on this test?
5, I believe.
35, 5 from this chapter.
5 problems.
From this chapter, you said.
Well, let me go over and make sure I got that.
Can you look up that debit and credit question that you're about to ask us?
We're
And
happy with this
kind of
5 questions.
say it. Where we go.
Do you have the sheet that I gave you? The one where I told you what page it's on? Yeah, you do. I'm gonna give them with me last hold on, let me see if I got another one. This sheet. okay?